Paschal moon, the full moon of this first springtime. And now we are about to enter into Easter Sunday, the holiest day of the year for some Christians. It's also Passover time for Jews. But where does this celebration come from? Is there other traditions out there that we have forgotten about? What about the Egyptians? We're going to discuss that and more with my guest, Dr. Joanna Kujawa, when we get back from the intro. And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true Gnosis. Today I'm with Dr. Joanna Kujawa with this amazing book, The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddess of Eros and Secret Knowledge. I highly recommend it. Some of the topic of tonight will be part of what's in this book, but we also have new material for an upcoming book as well. So I'm excited to bring that to Gnostic Informant today. And link for this book is in the description. I really highly recommend it. Check it out. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for this introduction, and I like your new intro as well. Although, I really miss the funky Jesus that you used to have.
Oh yeah, I still have him for the outro, so we're good.
Okay.
After we leave, yeah. So let's get into the topic of, well, first of all, people are probably wondering, what's with the title, The Gospel of Mary and the Mysteries of Isis? People that
I
might be
know.
saying, those are two
I
different.
know.
Let's bring these together in an interesting way, because I know you have some of this stuff is touched on in the book, but you also have been getting into some of the Egyptian culture that you are starting to explore now for an upcoming book. So let's talk about that a little bit.
That's right. So maybe I'll just kind of rewind, what happened before when we spoke
Sure.
almost like probably 10 months ago or so when the book was released, The Other Goddess was released. And in The Other Goddess, I kind of discuss, the similarities between Mary Magdalene and earlier goddesses such as Sumerian Nimna or Inanna or Isis especially, and this is of interest for us today. And I also in that book focus on the erotic element of these goddesses, right? So, and a tantric element of these goddesses. But now, I started to also focus on this other element, but they were always present in the process of, so to speak, resurrection or ascension of the soul. And what was their story there, why they were important. And as for Mary Magdalene, and it is important for the Gospel of Mary that we discuss in a moment, it is that I kind of postulated that after the resurrection or whatever, crucifixion, whatever happened there, Mary Magdalene actually went to Alexandria because there was a group in Alexandria then called Therapete, of whom not Plotinus, Philo, sorry, Philo is talking, and they invited women of high spiritual development and of high erudition to be with them, which was very unusual and very Alexandrian, very Gnostic, right?
Yeah, and so you're talking about the therapeutai.
Therapeutai, yes,
Yeah,
okay.
okay, yeah.
Okay, therapeutai. Thank you. Please correct me at any time.
Just in case someone's listening might not have caught that, because
Yeah,
this is something
yes,
that a lot of people have been wondering about. What is Philo talking
yeah,
about? Therapeutai. Plutarch mentions them.
yeah.
So they get mentioned by a lot of people, but no one really knows what's going on. What are their beliefs?
Well, actually, Philo was pretty good because he said they were around Alexandria and also in the rural areas of Alexandria, but they were the educated kind of heretics.
They're
So
like
to speak.
doctors too, healers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
doctors and healers, but also spiritual healers, like meaning, so that's why it kind of relates to the ascension of the soul. And they were one of the very few groups that actually did invite women, but we have to be highly achieved women, so to speak, spiritually or otherwise, right? And I make a connection with Mary Magdalene going there as just a hypothesis, simply because they were also in contact with the Essenes, and with other people in what we now call Holy Land or Israel or Palestine, right? So I thought it would be like a natural way for her to go. And also I kind of postulated, and again, it's just a thesis, that perhaps she and Mary the Jewess or Mary the alchemist is the same one and the same person, who was this woman living in Alexandria who was teaching the ascension of the soul. And I'll get into it. The Gospel of Mary teaches the ascension of the soul. Not only this, my third link was that Mary the Jewess, or Mary the alchemist, was mentioned by Zosimus. Am I pronouncing it properly?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Zosimus of Panapolis. And Panapolis nowadays is Akhmin. And the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was discovered in Akhmin. So there was already
I
a
did not
tradition.
know that.
Yeah, so it was discovered in Akhmin, and Zosimus, was 200
That's
years.
a really good point.
Yeah, and so there was a
We're talking about the same location. The culture's got to be the same culture too.
Yeah, I know. And he says, and actually, the library of Open Library of National Library of Israel says, yes, like there are actually artifacts, this Mary, the alchemist, did exist, and she was an alchemist, and, they have sources and they have archaeological evidence. So I think it's interesting that she was teaching the ascension of the soul, the spiritual alchemy, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is teaching the same thing. Right? And we'll get into this. So I think there's already a strong Egyptian connection there. So today I would like to focus on the fact that, the Gospel of Mary was found in Egypt, and we should be looking at, how on Egyptian influences and how Egyptians would read it. Because even now, and in my opinion, the best translation of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is by Jean-Yves Leloup, who is a French scholar.
Is it a Coptic text or a Greek text?
Oh, I'll get into it, because there are two different papyri, right?
All right.
So he's very friendly towards the Gnostics and so on. However, he's looking at it, and he's like a giant, spiritual giant. So, I feel really bad, like, correcting him. I'm just adding to what he says.
Yeah.
Because he looks at it from a perspective of Christian theology. So in a way, everything is like Holy Spirit. And I think, Holy Spirit is such a Christian concept. What did Egyptians think about, this gospel? How would they read it? Right? So this is for me a point of kind of entry here. So if I'll just answer your question now. So first of all, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was found first in around 1896. I think this is like a date that most people agree on. And in Akhmin, this is where Zosimus used to live, right? That's why I think it is quite important. And it was sold to a German collector who, that's why it is called the Berlin Papyrus or the Berlin Codex, right? It was sold to a German collector. And it was dated when, other people looked at it, linguists looked at it into 400s, which is quite late. However, the more they looked at it, they realized, and it was written in the Sahidic Coptic.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
And they were saying that, they're just kind of borrowings, grammatical borrowings, and kind of expressions that do not belong to Sahidic Coptic, that are probably earlier. But they didn't have any evidence until later they found another piece of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene written in Greek, and it is on the other side of Nile, because Akhmin is like on the east side of Nile, and this other place, which is Oxyricus, I think I pronounced it properly, Oxyricus, was found across the Nile, kind of diagonally. I think it's about 150 kilometers south of Cairo. And this part of the Gospel of Mary is written in Greek, and it's dated to the 2nd century. Some people think that it's maybe as early as 90s to 150. So it's a much earlier copy than the one found in Akhmin. So the second one is called the Ryland Papyrus. And for some reason, when you do research, they seldom talk about the Ryland Papyrus because it is much earlier, I think. I think it's a bit devious. They want the Gospel of Mary to be really late, right?
Right.
When this one, if it was written in the 90s, it's basically as old as the Gospel of John.
Yeah. It's right on par with the other Gospels, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I think this is interesting, and I think we should not kind of disregard it that it was found in Egypt, right? So there's a strong Egyptian collection right there. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And before I kind of launch into this, I want to apologize to your, viewers also, because I have secret notes around me. I will have to put on my glasses probably to read them, because this is just my new research, right? So I'm just kind of, it's not in a perfect order yet and so on. But I started to look, at some of my own influences, because apart from being, I primarily call myself spiritual detective. So although I'm an academic and a scholar, I'm also like an experiencer, so I'm reading the text for spiritual evolution too, although I'm not religious in an institutionalized sense. So I was looking into, different histories of Egypt, and I came across some people from the early 20th century, especially Paul Branton, who is like the spiritual detective. Okay, he wrote two very influential books. One is A Search in Secret India, and the other one is Search in Secret Egypt. So he has a cult following, the same like Hermann Hesse has. Okay, except that he's writing nonfiction. And the reason why I trust him, it is because when I was deeply, immersed in esoteric Hinduism, and I read his book, his experiences were the same as my experiences. And he actually met major Hindu teachers such as Ramana Maharshi and introduced them to the West. Okay, so I think he's a genuine thing, right? And he also did research and went to Egypt, and was interested in what did Egyptians believe, what are their spiritual experiences. And when he spoke to Egyptians and he did some research, he kind of did what now alternative Egyptologists do. He said that according to his opinion and people he was speaking to, Egyptian civilization started right at its peak. That's why he thinks that it was probably started by a different civilization, because it is not like we think that, there were like small huts and then people were like growing some papyri along the Nile or whatever it is that they're growing, and then they built pyramids. He says, no, it's quite the opposite. It started at its peak, and it eventually the whole culture, including mythology or theology, started to degrade because there was less and less understanding what was involved in the rituals. So I think it is important to know, because, for example, he says that and I didn't know it, because it's a new research for me, that, for example, Sphinx was found, not built, 5,000 years ago during the Fourth Dynasty, and they thought, wow, that's really ancient. So they uncovered it because of a sense of Sahara. It was covered, so that this small part was sticking out. And for them, even for what we consider ancient Egyptians, it was already an ancient thing. They didn't build it, they discovered it.
Right.
Yeah. So, and for some reason, and there's this ongoing, obviously, dialogue, which is not very friendly between academics, who have like one theory about Egypt and there's additional theories. But what I like about Branton is also that he says that hieroglyphics, and this is common with other esoteric traditions, whether Hindu or even Gnosticism, had 3 levels of meaning. So one meaning is, like regular meaning, you speak like we speak, right? So just very basic, mundane stuff, like when we have a conversation with friends. The second one was for the priests who knew some mythological narratives, like, for example, Osiris was killed by his brother, his wife and consort Isis, found 14 or 42 pieces of his body, depending on a story, and in my the other goddess, I also explained, that Venus was really important. She needed to resurrect him, right? And then she conceived, child Horus, through this. But they don't know the spiritual meaning behind it. Okay, they just tell you stories the way I would say maybe Catholic priests or some other ministers tell you the story of Jesus or Mary, but they just know the narrative that was given to them without understanding what the narrative is about. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And then he says there's a third level of meaning to hieroglyphics, which actually only the Hierophants knew, that they passed over to initiates. And this is the lost meaning, so to speak, of
inner mysteries. Yeah.
Inner mysteries. And that caught my attention for 2 reasons. Because in esoteric Hinduism, you also have actually more even levels than that. And the biggest level is called para. It is when you speak, for example, let it be, it actually happens. Not like I speak, let it be, nothing happens, right? But if I let it be, because it depends from what level of awareness of spiritual consciousness you speak it.
Wow.
Okay, and this is what Gospel of Mary actually is about. So this exists in esoteric Hinduism to survive different levels of language. And human beings, if they do evolve their consciousness and their ways of doing it, yeah, and the same in Gospel of Mary, she's giving us a way of doing it, then your language becomes para, or what the top level of hieroglyphics. You're actually a total creator. What you say happens instantly. But not, so you can say the same thing and nothing happens, because, and I'll explain when I speak about the Gospel of Mary, you're in the material level. But if you're on the fourth level, according to the Gospel of Mary, then it happens because you're one with cosmic consciousness, you're one with the divine mind.
Wow, that's fascinating. Imposter Suspense, thank you for your super chat. Just wanted to, this is a good question. What's in the Gospel of Mary? Do you want to?
Okay, so do you want me to jump there? Because this is the next point. So
yeah, I just wanted, I didn't know if you wanted to.
yeah, I'm totally going to most of the show.
Let's hold that thought then. Let's keep going with what you're saying.
I definitely am going to discuss it. So thank you, and thank you for this very important question.
We'll circle back to it. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, we'll circle back to this. I just want to say, because why am I looking into Egypt, and then I'll go like, okay, we have to look at it the way Egyptians did, and then I'll tell you what's there. Does it make sense? Yeah, because it's an excellent question. So and also, in Gnostic circles, they said that Jesus gave free, or Christ or Savior or teacher, right? Like this is depends which Gnostic readings you use. Say that there were three levels of teachings. One for the people around the Lake of Galilee, the stories in the Bible, which are very simple, and so simple, but I sometimes don't know what they're about, right? Because they make no sense to me most of the time, right? Second one is, that he gave to people like his disciples. And the third one, that it was esoteric teachings that he gave to Mary Magdalene, and sometimes to Mary and John, depending, who is writing this. So I just want to say that in all esoteric traditions, whether in India or even Gnosticism, and here also in Egypt, there are at least three levels of speech. Okay, and the meaning of language, and also hieroglyphics were considered the language of the gods, which was forgotten, and people just started to use it just for mundane things like conversation, buy your groceries, call your wife, kind of thing. Yeah? And the same is said about Sanskrit, that it was a language of the gods, and eventually was completely forgotten, and only scholars read it, but they don't understand how to use it on the level of para, which means makes you're one with God. You're God. You're not different from God, right? Because you have a power of creation if you reach this level of awareness. So before I, jump into it, I just want to say that the Gospel of Mary is that Paul Branton, the one who wrote In Search in Secret India and Search in Secret Egypt, and I know he had genuine experiences in India. That's why I kind of trust his experiences in Egypt. Is that he actually, so this is a great story that is repeated by many scholars and also alternative, esoteric sources, that, he was, I think in late 1920s, he went to Egypt, and because he was quite influential and he kind of knew British ambassadors and so on, he let himself in. He was allowed to spend the night in the Pyramid of Giza by himself, locked away. And he claims that he had an experience of what is described, as an esoteric meaning of the mysteries of Isis, right? So we can believe it or not, right? But he describes this experience. So, for example, he says, the reason why it is difficult to read this part of his book, it is because he goes into archaeological and spiritual at the same time. And, which one am I following, right? Like two plots that are interweaving too often. But for example, he mentions that in the Pyramid of Giza, there's the sarcophagus, which is 150 feet above the ground, and the sarcophagus is definitely not a burial kind of place, because Egyptians actually put burials deep in the vaults underground, and it usually had lots of inscriptions and so on. This one is above the ground and has no inscriptions, right? So he says that he believes that this was actually used for the mysteries of Isis. So basically initiates, and you had to be like highly evolved initiate, right, were taken by the hierophants, Am I pronouncing it properly? Hierophant? Yeah. Hierophants, to this sarcophagus, and then they perform certain rituals and possibly give them some drugs as well, right?
Yeah,
But,
that's part of it. I was just talking about that last night.
I
Last night
know.
I had another scholar on it. When you get initiated, you take the right, you take the drug.
Yeah.
You
And
drink
so
the
you should,
Tachyon or the Soma or whatever it is. You drink it.
yeah.
It's part of the
And
ritual.
yeah, it's part of a ritual, and it was not just to stupefy you; it was the opposite. So you can get out of your,
It's the contact. It's how you contact the God. It's that
That's
medium.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and otherwise, like, what am I going to do tomorrow? How am I going to pay the rent? Is she going to call me back? Forget that shit.
You need that. Yeah, I totally understand it.
It's like ayahuasca, probably, which I one day would really like to try. I never did.
I've tried it.
Yeah, was it good?
Oh, I can see why people. That's why I understand when people talk about, I met God when I took DMT. Yeah, I get it. Because I've tried it before, and I know exactly what you're saying, and you're not lying.
Yeah, exactly.
It is an out of this world experience. But
yeah, I have to do it, but I want to do it properly.
You go. I have to do it.
I have to do it. Yeah, I definitely. But I want to do it.
People don't say that, but that's funny. That's awesome.
I have to do this, but I want to go to there are some places in the Amazon where serious shamans, and drag me up, and I will see. Which is funny that I'm saying it because I actually never even smoke anything, but ayahuasca. I want to do, I'm like unusual.
It's life changing. It's life changing.
Yeah, because I believe it is a spiritual experience. So anyway, so they give you some drugs, so get away from your regular level of consciousness. And he says that he actually went through this experience on some kind of spiritual level. That first he was faced by some kind of horror figures, that were chasing him through the pyramid. He was totally horrified, but because he was spent lots of time in India and he was used into meditation. He was a serious seeker, right? So he says he just sat down and focused on witness, what is presenting itself to you. And eventually this kind of hellish images disappeared, and it was like a test. And then two kind of out-of-body hierophants showed up, took him to sarcophagus, and went through the whole ritual. When he actually had an out-of-body experience, he saw himself lying, in a sarcophagus, and it was said, now you can see the face of God, and also to prove. So he argues that the whole thing was about proving for advanced initiates, that you are not this body. You have an experience in this body, and then you can ascend from the body during this lifetime and also after your lifetime. So it's a little bit like in the Gospel of Philip when they say, if you think that you die and you're resurrected, you're a complete idiot. You have to first get resurrected and then die. This is what Gospel of Philip says, right?
Wow.
So basically it refers back. You have to know that you're immortal within this body, and you actually can go in and out of the body anytime if you have proper level of developed consciousness. So I don't know, this is a very often quoted kind of experience of Paul Branton, so we can believe it or not, but it basically describes what the Egyptians were doing according, to esoteric sources. You take a higher initiate through hierophants, right? Would take you, but like bodily hierophants. He had just a kind of out-of-body hierophants, right? And they would take you, drag you up, they will show you, and then, you would see the face of God, and you realize that your body's lying there, and you can go in and out. And it's quite interesting because especially at Karnak, temples of Karnak, which is actually the most beautiful temples devoted to Isis, and Amunet, which is another goddess, which is actually Isis and Hathor, the same. What they show is basically, they show that Osiris stands for initiate. You want to have this experience, and you're a serious seeker. This is for serious seekers. You don't do it out of curiosity because you get a beating. You end up in hellish consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Osiris represents us.
That's exactly what happens. They call it bad trips because
yeah,
you're not in the right state for this. You're not. You're doing this for it's amazing how that works out that way.
Yeah, it is. So I actually was reading some esoteric sources, and they said, "Are you a true speaker? Because otherwise, don't waste my time, and you have, hellish time, right? So you have to be serious. So
almost like you're rejected by the God.
well,
I hate to
you
say it, but it's almost like that. It's almost
reject
like,
it because you're not serious, like, do you
right,
want to
right,
know,
right,
or
right.
you want to tell your friends, dude, I had this experience, right?
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was awesome. So no, you don't do it for this reason, right? So Osiris actually in Egyptian mysteries represents a serious initiate, and I'll explain later also why. And he is also, you know, the goddess like Isis or Amunet comes and torches him on the head with the Ankh. Okay, so it's in the third eye, which is also extremely Hindu,
And it
right?
looks like
Because
a cross. It looks like a cross, kind of.
yeah, it looks like a cross, just wake him up, right? And then what Horus represents, it's not a child, it is Osiris who already had this experience of ascension of the soul. Because Horus is shown in a way that the cobra is on top of your head, which is basically in images of Osiris, the cobra is going in his direction, upright cobra, which is a little bit like Kundalini energy in India. And then Osiris already is awakened because the cobra is already on top of his head, and he also has a finger on top of his mouth, which means I now know, but I'm not allowed to speak about it because for some reason it was protected with secrecy.
You
And
see
I
that
still
with
not.
Horus. Horus does that a lot too. In his
This is Horus, exactly. Horus is doing it,
yeah.
So
Oh,
that's
that's what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so he's awakened. He's awakened because the cobra is upright and it's on top of his head, which means went through all the energetic centers. And he says you cannot talk about it, which kind of makes me curious because in esoteric tantra, which I discussed in the other goddess, they did the same thing. But they said you cannot speak about it. But I thought maybe because it was a sexual ritual and it's so outrageous, right? Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you.
There's a
Perfect.
whole bunch of them like this. There's a lot
Yeah.
of them. Yeah. So this is all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder why this is not even sexual as far as we know, although she did need his penis to resurrect him, so I don't know. So
Oh, look at this one. Look at this one real quick. Just not to cut you,
yeah.
but this
No,
one
no,
is
no, I love it.
that. Look
Yeah,
at that one.
exactly. That's
He
it.
actually has the erection. It looks like the snake on his head.
Exactly. So it's like snake, kind of an erect cobra, right? Which is
Yeah. Wow.
Hinduism. And and I now know, I am one with the gods. In fact, I am God. And if you remember in my last talk when I am discussing in the other goddess, after sexual ritual, you walk like gods and goddesses on earth. So he is that now, but for some reason you cannot speak about it. So I don't know. I have to explore it, for my next book. Why is it? Because I said in the other goddess, I said maybe because it was a sexual ritual in Tantra. So, it's just too outrageous. But here, why not speak about being awakened? Like it's
But
almost
that's kind of a
forbidden.
common theme in the mysteries, and like in the Eleusinian mysteries, which is very much connected to Egypt.
Yeah.
Because Bacchus is basically like Osiris, and Demeter is like Isis. In those mysteries, you're not supposed to tell anybody what you saw.
I know.
Yeah,
And I wonder why. So
yeah. I wonder why. You're right. Wonder why.
So I want to explore it later, but as I said, it's a work in progress at the moment, right? So when I was writing the other goddess, this is what I knew, and I mentioned, and I write about the Gospel of Mary, and I thought I got it, and of course I didn't get it, and now I think, I know so much more, because I studied this Gospel for 17 years, and I finally started to get some insights. So I just wanted to set this kind of background. Before I speak about Gospel of Mary, I'm just checking the time. Okay. Before I speak about what's actually in the Gospel of Mary, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So first of all, as I said, we already know. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love this.
And I'm not terribly into Bacchus, but I always, even before I, was interested in any of this ages ago when I lived in Toronto, I was fascinated with Dionysus, and he's actually the Bacchus, right? Like
and Diodorus and Herodotus both say that Bacchus is Osiris.
Yeah, he's no Osiris.
One of them's Greek, one of them's Egyptian, but they're the same god. That's what they say.
And that's why, although people talk about religion and mysteries and so on, but I would say that they actually got it from Egypt. I will tell you, because it's a much more ancient culture. And any smart Greek like Solon, Pythagoras,
they always went to Egypt.
They were, I don't know which one was it. I think it was Solon who was banging at the doors of the temple, waited for 3 years, ate, some geckos on the desert, and they let him in, and share some of the wisdom, right?
Yeah,
And
Plato says that Solon went to Egypt to bring the laws back to Athens.
That's right. Yes. And
Pythagoras traveled to Egypt and Babylon, and then went back to Italy, and then started his school. It's always Egypt. Right. Egypt's always in the center of everything. Yeah,
that's right. And that's why, this theory that it actually degenerated with time kind of makes sense to me, but I don't have maybe time to discuss it more, because people started to lose what is actually the mystery about, of Isis. It became the 3 levels of language, of hieroglyphics. All they had eventually, it was the second level, the first and second level. Like, we know the story, but we don't know what it is about.
Somebody said Priapus, so I just had to pull it out for him. That's all.
Yeah, well, yeah. So this is probably to do something with sexual mysteries that I discuss in the other goddess. That's why sexual organs are very important, and that's why Isis needed his penis. But I discuss it in the other goddess. So let's move to what's in the Gospel of Mary, right? Because somebody already asked a question. So first of all, we don't have a full Gospel of Mary, which you probably very well known. We have only parts of this. Even when we put the 2 papyri together, the Berlin papyrus from Akhmin and the Ryland papyrus from Oxyricon, we have only parts of a gospel. So we have to kind of improvise. Not only it's extremely mysterious and difficult, we still have to improvise. So first of all, first 6 pages are missing. So we start with page 7. In page 7, the teacher, capital T, the teacher, because it's not called Christ or Jesus, the teacher, so the Peter asked the teacher, right? Peter, there are 2 main contents in the first part of the Gospel of Mary. Peter asks the teacher, please tell us about the sin of the world. Sin of the world, right? And the teacher answers, Peter, sin as such does not exist. Okay, that's very interesting.
He says it's only sin because you call it sin.
Yes, it's only sin because you call it sin. And
I was like, dude, this is a Jesus that I like.
I like this Jesus.
This is a different Jesus in this
That's
story.
Why I spent 17 years.
There is no sin. It's only
there is
sin
no
because
sin,
you
and I
call
thought,
it sin.
And like you, I
no
was
one knows about this.
Catholic, and it is just like, I'm not worthy, and I didn't do anything, but I'm not worthy. What's going on, right? So, but he explains further, which I think is really interesting. He says what happens, because we are going back to these levels of different consciousness that Egyptians were talking about. If you do something from a lowest level of consciousness, then there will be consequences of low kind. Right? So, for example, if you do something out of greed, or you do something out of hate, it's not that it's like bad or something, objectively, but there will be price to pay. Right? So basically, it's almost like immediate karma, right? Like if you act like a moron, it will get back to you eventually, right?
Yeah.
So immediately he's talking about levels of consciousness, which is second part of it, which I want to focus on later. So it's interesting. And he says, but if you do something from a high level of consciousness, which is basically your intentionality, really, I'm just interpreting here, then the consequences will be good. You create good. You're actually the creator, right? Now, the second part, so this is a Jesus I like too. We are on the same page. In the second part of the first part, the second question that is asked actually is, what about laws? Peter asked. Should we have more laws? Because in Jewish culture, do this, don't do that, a lot of this, right?
He said, don't make laws like the lawless ones do. Isn't it?
That's right. He says, don't, no more laws.
No, I remember reading this and being like, what?
I know.
Don't make laws like the lawless ones do.
That's right. And
that is like, I love it.
He says, because we'll be bound by them. So he wanted
bound by them, right? I forgot about that part.
We will be bound by them. No, there's no need for more laws, he says. And also, and that's really important, he says, don't listen to others who tell you the truth is there, the truth is here, and they point into outside things. The truth lives within you.
Yes.
As me.
Yeah,
right?
this is a brilliant
Basically,
text. This is a brilliant text.
yeah, and he says, so the Gnosis is within you. Don't ignore what the other saying. Almost like he doesn't say it, but because there's no laws, forget the laws. What's here. I live within you as you. I am in you, right? So my peace is within you. The wisdom, the Gnosis is within you. So forget, no, because it will bring you down. And if you read the Gospel of Mary, especially the second part, the level of consciousness is the key to ascension. Okay, so if you just follow the laws, you're at the lowest level of consciousness. So you're not only bound, your freedom is limited, but you also cannot evolve.
Yeah.
Because there are so many restrictions, and this is where the second part is coming, which I think is the coolest part of the Gospel of Mary, but also the most mysterious. Okay, so these are the first two things from the first part, and now I'm moving to the second part. So the second part, I think pages 11 to 14, let me check my notes. 11 to 14 are missing. And then we start with page 15. So this is when the disciples, Jesus went away. This is all they say. But also they say, they get rid of him. What about us, right? They're scared. The disciples are scared and come to Mary Magdalene. And they basically say, sister.
What did he tell you that he didn't tell us?
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
And then because this is why I love this text, because in this text, Mary's the one with the secret knowledge, and all these other bozo disciples, they don't know shit. They're like, Mary, help us. What did he tell you? And then I think it's Andrew who's like, don't listen to her. She doesn't know. And Peter's like, bruh, who are you to say what she knows? If Jesus wanted to tell her the secrets, then he told her the secrets.
Actually, yeah, you're very close, but actually Peter is the villain.
Oh, it's the other way around. Okay, all right. Yeah, it's been a while since I read it.
Especially in this gospel, represents like the institutionalized
religion.
religion.
But that makes sense that Peter has to be the villain because he represents Rome.
That's right. He represents Rome, institutionalized religion.
Peter, the patriarch, comes over and is like, don't listen to her. She doesn't know anything. And Mary, so Peter kind of represents like this Roman patriarchal system.
Yeah.
Mary represents this feminine Egyptian Isis type of mindset.
Yeah, I like it. I like this interpretation. But also he represents the lower level of consciousness. Because like, what about the laws? Am I not a sinner? Like, how come there are no sinners? Like, he doesn't get it. Basically, that's the point.
That's a really good way to put it. That's probably true. I think you're onto something there.
And and you're right too. She represents this other feminine.
She represents this other type of Christianity that's like not all about the doctrines and the laws.
Never happened.
Never happened. Right.
It never happened. So and they say, okay, sister, we know that the teacher shared teachings with you that he didn't share with us. Thank you. Me too. That she didn't share with us. Please share what the teacher shared with us. I'm paraphrasing, right? And she says, of course, my brothers, right? She gathers them. I will tell you what he told me. He had told me. So they come to her, right? After they are scared because, we said they punished him. What about us? They will punish us too, So tell us, remind us what, he told you that he didn't tell us. And then she says that she saw, and so it's very different from, Easter stories, that she saw him in a vision. Okay, in a vision. However, here the vision is not like an imaginary vision, because when she sees him, he says, Mary, you're blessed because you can see me when others cannot perceive me, basically, right? So she's blessed. And she says, do I see you through psyche, psyche, and I'll explain what it means, or do I see you through pneuma or pneuma, which are different levels of consciousness. I'll get into it.
The Greeks know this stuff. This would, if you're a Greek native speaker, you read this and you know what it means. In English, you're like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, I'll explain it. So don't worry about it. And he says, no, you see me in between, which is the nous. And I will explain now. Okay, so he shows himself to her simply because she is on a different level of consciousness than other disciples. So he was there, but they couldn't perceive him because like Peter, very on a lower level of consciousness. So now I'm going to go to different levels of consciousness, and it is going to be a little bit tricky, so I put on my glasses, okay, so I don't make any mistakes. So first of all, the soul, she explains, we assume that she explains the ascension of the soul, because there are a few pages missing, and she goes through the 4 levels of energies. 4 levels of energies, as some translators call it, 4 levels of climates of the soul, but basically different levels of energies or different levels of consciousness, which is very common in all the esoteric traditions, including Tantra. But okay, let's focus. And I'm going to go back to Egypt, so I'll explain Egyptian and Greek meaning of each. So the first one is missing, but because we know what the next 3 are, we know that the first one must have been Soma. So what is Soma? Soma is basically you believe only in material existence. So basically there's like 3-dimensional existence. You are this bag of meat. You know, somebody tells you to inject something, you inject something. Somebody wants you to put a chip in your brain, you accept it because you want to live longer. You don't believe there is another form of consciousness. Yeah?
Yeah.
So this is very basic. So Soma, which is basically you're asleep. You just believe you just were born and there's no cause for it, and you die, and too bad, you know, just try to make the best of this. And this is like you believe only in material existence, right? And it's called Soma, right? So you're caught in this material existence, you don't understand why, right? And you just maybe try to do the best of this, right? And that's why you need laws and stuff, because, you know, you need some rules of behavior. You have no access to anything else. The second level, so this is the first level that the soul has to raise itself or herself above, right? In the ascension of the soul, you have to get out of your head that you're just a body and you're material being, right? The second level is associated with desire or craving or not enoughness, you know, which basically it relates to psyche, psyche in Greek, psyche. Now, psyche what's psyche? Because this is actually, it's very often it's translated in Christianity as soul, but the Greeks and Egyptians understand it completely different.
And there's a connection with Eros because of the myth of Suke and Eros.
Yeah,
common Greek motif.
Yeah, it's a common Greek, which is basically, yes, and I have to write about it because so many people talk to me about it, but I just want to focus now. But you are completely right. So psyche, basically, which is also called diet in Egyptian, psyche and diet is the same thing. Okay. And in Hinduism, because I talk about esoteric Hinduism, it's called sushumna. So you have psyche, diet in Egypt. Sorry, I'm showing a finger, but I didn't mean to do this. And sushumna. What's happening there? This is basically where in your body, where it's subtle body, right? All your memories and desires are stored. So to ascend, you have to drop them like a garment, she says it. What does it mean? So for example, if you have an unfulfilled desire in this lifetime, like I don't know, maybe you want to be a famous writer, or maybe you want to be a professor, or maybe you want to be as famous as Joe Rogan or something, right? So you can either let go of this desire, and if you can't, you have to do this. You just get rid of this desire one way or another. Okay, so this is like esoteric teachings, but basically in Mary Magdalene, she says the second level is this psyche or diet, which is basically where in psyche all desires and all addictions also are stored. So if you do not work on them, basically I'm just interpreting, right? If you don't work on them, you have to carry them to next incarnations and so on. They bring your soul down. So can I explain from my personal experience?
Yeah.
Because otherwise the text is so esoteric, you have to make it personal.
I love any personal experiences. I love it. Bring it.
So for example, like I already had an experience of next level of consciousness through initiation, similar to what we are talking about. But I had so many unfulfilled desires that I brought myself down. Like I saw the face of God, but I said, how can I finish my PhD now? Okay. Do I still want to be a professor? Do I want to write this book? So these desires brought me down to the second level of psyche or diet. Do you understand? Because I'll explain third level in a moment. Although I had access through Nous, to higher consciousness because of initiation, I had so much that I wanted to do yet, which were like from a spiritual point of view on a lower level, that I couldn't merge with divine consciousness. Do you understand what I'm meaning?
Yeah.
Like, what about this? Right. That's why just esoteric teachers, and I'm just adding it outside of the Gospel of Mary, basically they say, if you have a desire, either let it go if possible. If not, go for it. Like Carpocratians did, go for it. Or something, because then you learn that it wasn't worth it really. It was good for a moment, and then you were where you were. Yeah. Are you going to be really more happy when you're a professor? Like you have a sense of accomplishment, but yes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So basically, and what's interesting also, the Diet, which is the Egyptian name for this, is called also Osiris's spine. Okay, it's Osiris's spine, and when you Google Osiris's spine, there in reliefs and it's shown the back of Osiris, and this is actually the initiate's spine, this is where Diet is, which is where all the these unfulfilled desires and maybe negative tendencies are stored. So basically, through initiation, you have to clear these desires from the spine of Osiris. Does it make sense? If I'm getting too technical, just tell me, Joanna, explain again.
Let me just ask you one question, and then this is all amazing, by the way. But is this what you mean by Osiris's spine? Yes or no? I'm pulling it up right now. Is this what they're talking about?
Yeah, that's Osiris's spine.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
Exactly. It's Osiris's spine, and as you say, it has also different 4 levels. You see 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
And here
So
there are lower levels.
So is it like the 4 levels of the mysteries that we're getting at?
Yeah, 4 levels of mysteries.
Oh, this is good. This is getting good.
So,
All right,
go ahead. Yeah, and it's in esoteric tantra, it's the same, right? So that's why I'm saying. So in esoteric tantra, it's also called vasanas, which is these desires that are just bringing you down. Nothing wrong again. Nothing wrong. There's no sin in having desires. But if you want to ascend, you have to do something about it, or forget about ascension for now and enjoy life. Okay, so there is no judgment there. Okay, so that's different. That's why there is no sin. There's no problem. Do whatever. But so it's the second level. So psyche or psyche, if you just read in Greek, or Diet, or in ancient Egyptian, or Sushumna in esoteric tantra, is one and the same thing. This is one of his desires. That's why the second level.
This is one of those words that pop up all throughout these cultures, that like Jnana, Gnosis, and Veda, like all these words that they're in different languages, but they don't just mean the same thing, but they have the same importance.
They have the same importance, as they say, almost like the same level of awakening, so to speak. They bring it up because these words are very powerful. We are talking about different levels of language, so this is like the next level of language, right? And that's why the second part level of consciousness that you have to move through, of initiation, is letting go of your craving or desire, right? Because the second one is, Mary says, the soul is moving. You have to drop the craving, right? And the cravings are stored in your Diet or in your psyche or psyche, right? So it's the second level. So you have to let it go, and she says, drop it like a garment, right? You can drop it like a garment. Then the third one is Nous. So Nous, Gnostic scholars argue about it. Some people say it's hard, but I think Nous is basically higher level of consciousness. And in Hinduism, it is called the Buddhi, which is the intuitive mind. This is higher mind. And also, even in Christian theology, it is called intellection. Thomas Aquinas called it intellection.
Yeah.
Immediate grasping of a truth. You don't go through reasoning, therefore, this, therefore that.
It's like something, you just get it. You just get it.
You just get it. You don't even know. Some people call it like New Age people, I got a download, right? Yeah. So this is this kind of thing.
It's what Orpheus says. When Orpheus says, those who have ears to hear,
that's
can
right.
hear. But if you don't have ears to hear, get out.
It's not for you. Right. because it means nothing to you, right?
Yeah.
So and because you're not on this level of consciousness, and therefore you speak also the language. You don't understand the language we speak because you didn't make this effort. You didn't go through the initiation and so on. So this is it. So this one also in Egyptian is called. So basically, it is like a hook to the highest cosmic consciousness. So you have access to the source. You can see the gods, so to speak, but you cannot be one with the gods yet. And this is how she saw Jesus, or the teacher, Mary Magdalene, through the news, because he told her this, because you're not fully established in it. So, for example, we all, like serious spiritual seekers, we have experiences, but then back to level 2, right? I want this, I don't want. Yeah, we're back into mundane. So Gnosis gives you access, but you are not. It's almost like sometimes you get it in a good meditation, or you just do something, act of grace in Christian, or whatever. It happens. You have a great sexual experience. That happens, but then you lose it, right? You know it's there, but you don't know how to hold on to this, right? That's why the third level of Gnosis, it's also known, you have to live up against your ignorance. So what is ignorance? It's wrong understanding. So, for example, not understanding what is really important. And this is what Jesus, the teacher teaches in the first part. Don't say this is right, this is wrong, go within. Right? When you have a well-developed Gnosis, you go within. You listen to the higher knowledge, to your Buddhi, or your intellection, or and it's called also Sekhem. In Egypt, they have this concept. It's called Sekhem. Not Sekhmet, which is a goddess, but Sekhem. Sekhem is spiritual wisdom. So now you have access to spiritual wisdom. Okay? So you have Sekhem. So it's in Egyptian, Sekhem. You have spiritual wisdom. So you have to then let go of your ignorance. So I give personal examples, which I gave before. So because of my initiation, I had an access, I had Sekhem or Gnosis, but I still was caught up by my second level of consciousness. I want this, I want this, I want that. Will I be able to do it when I am, in some kind of divine ecstasy? Do you understand? The fear clicks in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you think I have things to do. What about my PhD, which is so ridiculous now? What about my thought was here I am in complete bliss, and I see the face, I'm one with cosmic consciousness, and then the thought comes out from a lower level of consciousness. What about your PhD? Yeah, because I'm just about to finish it, and it brings you down. So it means you have access, but your desires or addictions, it could be that you have a alcohol addiction or sex addiction or something, they bring you down, right? Because you think, I'll just have a drink, or I'll just this or that, right? So when to move against this ignorance, you surrender to higher wisdom, so which is Sekhem, or which is the Buddhi, or which is intellection, or which is Gnosis, which is hooked to divine source, right? So you have to do this. And the fourth one, it is called Wrath, but it's quite unfortunate that it has name actually, and it has 7 elements. But what it really represents, it's our latent concepts and our latent emotions that are still preventing us from staying with the cosmic consciousness or divine consciousness at all time, to be like gods and goddesses walking on earth. So it could be a form of jealousy, you're envious of someone still, or it could be something good. I was talking to an activist, so for example, because you are, there's so much evil in the world, so you are really angry still about it, and you think how can I get rid of this evil? And you start to use the methods of the archons, so to speak, right? So archons are on the much lower level of consciousness, which means you bring yourself down for a good reason, but this is not the way to fight the evil. Do you understand? So all latent things. And in the Gospel of Mary, for example, it could be your latent self-doubt, who says, who do you think you are? Self-doubt and so on. And for example, this is what the soul is, or external forces. The soul is assaulted something where are you going, vagabond? right? Who do you think you are, murderer? So you either you put yourself down, or the forces of the world put you down. So imagine like you are on a spiritual path and what your family does to you, basically, right? So this is what happens, right? But also your own self-doubt, because in the Gospel of Mary it exactly says this: where are you going, vagabond? Who do you think you are, murderer? Like you're assaulted, like within and without.
Wow. That's deep.
So you have to drop it. You have to drop it. So again, it takes us back to the first part when Jesus says, don't listen to the outside, right? But the biggest enemy is also within, right? Because it's also self-doubt. Who do you think who am I, to have this experience? Who am I to see the face of God, right? So these are for me, the core teachings of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And what is interesting at the end, I just have to read it because it is kind of mysterious, and perhaps you can help me and your audience also.
Yeah.
It says, the soul ascended because she went through the 4 levels of this. And she said, a design has been erased. So it's like a matrix, like the simulation was erased by the virtue of a higher design. This is the last thing. A design has been erased by the virtue of a higher design. So my interpretation, but I'm just interpreting because it's very mysterious, is that once you allow, move through this 4 level of different initiatory energies, now you are not affected by the lower design because you didn't succumb to its temptation and its threats, so to speak. So now you're one with a higher design. You know what I mean? So for
That makes
example,
a
you're
lot of
not
sense.
dead.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
just thought of though? There
Mhm.
is a text about it's attributed to Simon Magus.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think of what it's called. Someone in the comments might know what it's called, but it's a text that's attributed to Simon Magus, and it's passed down through Justin Martyr. And
Yeah.
so it's and he talks about this ascension through these levels.
The
So,
same.
but I'm not. It could be something completely different. But what I'm saying, like suggesting, maybe maybe you should compare those two. Maybe
Yeah,
you'll find.
it's a good idea. I have
I'm
to
just
take a
throwing
note.
something out there. That's just my first thought. I wonder if anyone in
So
the comments.
Justin the Martyr, he passed it, right? Because
Yeah, Simon Magus text that he wrote. It's
Thank
called.
you for this. Because there's lots of arguments that Simon Magus is the teacher, right? So
Yeah,
who knows? So
yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's the Simonians. They were called. They were a group of Christians called the Simonians, and these Christians are completely different than any Christians today. They thought that anybody can be deified, not just Jesus.
because it's true.
Yeah, if you reached apotheosis, you
Yeah.
became a god and you were worthy of worship. They would make a statue of you. They would put you in the temple.
I love
They
it.
had Pythagoras. They had
I
Plato.
really have to
You
check
have
it
to
out.
look up. You have to. So the best sources on Simon Magus are Hippolytus, Irenaeus, but Justin Martyr really goes into Simonians.
Irenaeus, I know. Irenaeus, he really loved us, didn't he? But at least he passed some knowledge over with hatred, right?
Yeah, and obviously after we're done here, I'll look and find where I got all this
Thank you.
from, and I'll email it to you because it's such a good source for this stuff. The early Christians were doing other shit than the ones that are doing today. They're not the same at all.
And there is no Christianity, like so to speak, anyway,
Yeah.
at the moment. So
And one more thing. I just remember this. They said that Simon Magus attained such high apotheosis. The gnosis that he attained was so high, better than Jesus. He had a wife named Helena, and they thought was Athena incarnate.
Yeah.
And Simon Magus they thought was Zeus.
Yeah.
So this is a whole different type of Christianity.
I love it. I love it.
I
But
love
the
it.
fact that everybody can achieve it, it's also mentioned in the Gospel of Philip. And also, going back to the other goddess, my book, this is what the esoteric tantra teaches. You will be walking like gods and goddesses on earth. So basically God lives within you and a goddess lives within you as you. So the only limitations you have, it is because you don't go through the initiatory processes. You don't purify your consciousness, but purify doesn't mean to be holy, but evolving your consciousness. So actually you already got incarnate, you just don't know it.
Yes.
That's why we say there's no
and they said that, yeah, Jesus was yeah, he was a god, he became a god, but so can anyone else.
Yeah, that's
It
right.
wasn't just about they didn't call themselves
No.
Christians, they called themselves Simonians.
Yeah.
But
Be-
it was from that Gnostic vein that they came out of,
yeah.
and
That's
which
very
was
interesting.
Egypt too, big in Egypt too.
Yeah. That's very interesting because you see, this is what all esoteric teachings are telling you. That's why they are being pushed aside, like the Gnostics, like the esoteric also Hinduism, because they tell you you are God, you know. And of course, you have to do some work because so you're not caught up for your own sake in your lower level of consciousness, believing shit that is going on around you. Go within and work on yourself, but you're God incarnate as you are. All you have to do is work on your own awareness. So this is all esoteric traditions of any standing. They teach us this. But I still wonder why they say don't tell anybody. Maybe because they're afraid of persecution. I don't know. Like,
Right. Yeah.
why don't mention. So anyway, but that's super interesting. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. And at the end, of course, Peter says, how is it possible that the teacher spoke to this woman in this way of things of which we are not aware ourselves? I'm paraphrasing, right? And
Yeah.
should we abandon our customs and listen to this woman, right? And I think it's Levi who says, Peter, shut up, basically, right? That teacher called her worthy and he loved her more than us. And then they disperse and, so this is the Gospel of Mary.
Yeah. Oh, and there's I'm looking at Epiphanius.
Mm-hmm.
There was called the first thought Enoia, which was female.
Yes,
Thought was to create the angels, and the first thought then descended into lower regions and created angels. Let's see. Thereafter, she was reincarnated many times, and being shamed. Her many reincarnations included Helen of Troy, and then she was finally reincarnated as Helen, a slave and prostitute of the Phoenician city of Tyre. Then descended in the form of Simon Magus to rescue his Enoia and to confer salvation upon men through the knowledge of himself. Wow, there's a lot here. So what I'll do is I'm just going to send you all these sources.
Yeah, please do. I would really appreciate it.
You'll be able to compare it all and pick it apart.
Yeah, because I'm just starting to work on it. So I would really appreciate it. And it's quite interesting because there's different levels of consciousness before, I completely shut up. Are also present in, esoteric tantra. They call it tattvas. And I think we have 36 of them or 37. Because what they do, it is that they not only look at the levels of ascent, but they also go how we descended and then how we can ascend. So it's a little bit similar to the myth of Sophia or theology of Sophia, right? Because she descends and she ascends, right?
Wait until you see this. I just pulled this out out of the abyss of the internet. Look at this. This is called a diagram of Simonian aeonology.
Yes.
You gotta love that. Aeonology. What?
Yeah.
So you have the universal principle, the boundless power, the universal root. So it's different levels, right?
Yes. So exactly. So the incomprehensible silence is exactly part of pneuma or pneuma, right? So which is the fourth level in the Gospel of Mary.
Wow. See, I knew there'd be a connection here.
Yeah.
So there's probably something going on there.
Yeah, something going on there. We have to look into it. I have to look into it.
Somebody asked, did Egyptians celebrate Easter for Isis and Osiris?
Yeah, so I think you passed this document
to
me.
Right? I did. I found a text from Plutarch, and let's just read it. Why don't we just read it, and we'll just decide what we think about it. It says, further the opinion that the lights of the moon, the risings of the Nile, bear a certain analogy. For the greatest rising that about Elephantine is 80 and 20 cubits, the same in number as the lights and measures of her monthly revolutions. The lowest around Mendes and Chios is, I don't know how to read that. Chios is of 6 cubits and analogous of her half quartering and the mean. That around Memphis, which is around regular height, it is 14 cubits corresponding to the full moon. We just had the Paschal moon 2 days ago. Apis, they say, is the animated image of Osiris, and he is conceived when a generative light falls strongly from the moon and touches a cow that is in heat. for which cause many of the decorations of Apis resemble the appearances of the moon. For he blackens over his shining parts with dusky robes, because it is on the new moon of the month of Fameneth. By the way, if you look up Fameneth, it's the Coptic month that is equivalent to April and Nisan. It's the month of springtime. That they hold a festival called by them the entrance of Osiris into the moon, being the commencement of springtime, as I just said. Thus they place the power. So it's the first new moon of the springtime, which is right now, Easter. Thus they place the power of Osiris within the moon, and say that Isis, being cause of his birth, is also his consort. On this account, they call the moon the mother of Saturn, which is really interesting because Isis is the daughter of Saturn.
Yeah.
But they call her the mother of Saturn in this context, and that she is a hermaphrodite nature, for she is filled and impregnated by the sun. And again, she emits and disseminates in the air generative principles, for that she doth not express the mischief wrought by Typhon or Set, and being after conquered by birth and bound thereby, she nevertheless emerges again and fights her way through to Horus. This latter is the universe surrounding the earth, and surrounding the earth, which is not entirely exempt either from generation or destruction, and that's where you get the divine child, Horus.
That's
And
right.
by the way, he's the one going like this too.
Yeah, he's going like this.
We just went back full circle again.
Yeah, and just another thing that I forgot to mention when I was talking about, Egypt, that the initiations, the hierophants, to go through this process of ascension had to happen either during the new moon or full moon. So it was connected with the, phases of the moon as well, like in the text that you just shown. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because when Christians date Easter, it's not like Christmas. December 25th every year is Christmas.
Yeah.
For some reason, Easter has to move based on the moon cycle.
Yes.
So they wait for the first full moon of springtime, and then it's the next Sunday after that. There's no set date. It's like if Jesus really died on a certain day, why don't you just mark that day on the calendar? They don't do that. It's not about that. It's this. There's those roots of the moon tradition, which tells you something. That means something right there. You can't ignore that. There's something going. It's something with the mysteries. It's something with the traditions. Something with the Passover. There's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah. In some traditions, we also talk about the movement of the planet Venus. So it's either Moon or Venus or both. So it is.
Which is Lucifer, by the way. Don't forget. It's Lucifer.
So exactly. So it is somehow all connected to much larger kind of perception of the universe. That's why I was going back. What would Egyptians think rather what Christians tell us at the moment, right? Because it's like last opinion, so to speak, but people who actually, it was written within particular vortex, right? Spiritual, esoteric vortex. So I'm just kind of trying to uncover this as much as possible, of course.
Absolutely. I love this stuff. I know you're short on time, but anything else you want to touch on? Anything you want to discuss? The floor is yours.
I don't know. Like, I'm open to the questions because my concern was when I was preparing for this that maybe it is a little bit too complex. Because the different level of consciousness. If somebody wants me to repeat something,
if anyone has questions, just type them up and I'll look at them. While we're waiting for those to come in, I just want to let everybody know the book, The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene, and the Goddess of Eros and Secret Knowledge. I recommend it. I have a copy. It's really good. Yeah, I've had it ever since the last time you came on. It's a really good book. And that's another thing is that you talk about how Mary, in this book, you discuss that there are traditions about Mary going and getting on boats and traveling to Europe, right?
Yes. So it was because there's this very kind of well-known tradition from actually quite the early Middle Ages that Mary did go to France, and I didn't know it because I was talking about it in Via the Goddess, but actually there is a Catholic tradition in southern France, in Provence, closer to Italy, but actually they still celebrate her as basically the Saint Mary Magdalene, who came on the boat to France, and they do believe that they have her skull. And in fact, National Geographic did like a 3D imaging of this, and it is definitely a woman, of Mediterranean origin. However, the church didn't allow to scan it for any DNA.
They're not gonna let you do all that.
Why ruin a bad story with
Right,
truth?
yeah, you gotta keep the legends alive. Vesper, thank you for the super. Is Mary the daughter of Plato and or Queen of Sheba?
I don't know, but I know that somebody. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. I feel so bad. He's writing about that she's some kind of queen, also. But I personally never explored it, and I actually do not necessarily believe it. Just from we have learned so far, it is most likely that she actually came from money, that she was educated. Perhaps she was half Egyptian. There are some in esoteric circles, they say that her father was Egyptian, her mother was Jewish. That's why the impurity on her, because she was a hybrid. She wasn't of pure Jewish blood. And that she was.
I think she's connected to the Magi in some way.
Absolutely, she could be, and and also that's another interesting theory. Thank you for bringing to my attention. Now I will have to spend time looking.
You're like me; you have to check everything out. I'm the same way.
That's right. So, and that definitely she was a woman of erudition, and this is what also French tradition says, right? That she was a woman of erudition, so she was definitely educated. The way actually Jesus was educated. So the whole thing of poverty and so on, I think, is just a medieval. For both Mary and Jesus are just the medieval stories, and I think they came from the fact that 99% of population, actually not that different, but now, we're in control of 1% of population, and basically it was. There's a hope for you, wretches. If not in this world, so no point of rebelling, but in other worlds, because look at Jesus and Mary.
This is a classical philologist trained in language and ancient Greek.
Wow,
Magos means mega witch. That's interesting.
Mega witch, very good.
Yeah.
It actually is very much in line, although I didn't know it when I was writing it in the other goddess, but I put her in the category of priestesses. I didn't call it witch, but the categories of priestesses, of that, connected with Egypt and Sumer and Babylon, right? That's why I said goddesses of Eros and secret knowledge, because I also believe in the other goddess that Eros, was a very powerful force, especially in not only in Tantra, but it was also carried on through the female lineage.
In Orphism too. Because the Orphics talked about how Eros is the highest god there is, because Eros has power over the elements. In Plato's Symposium, Socrates actually, who's arguing, he says that there's no other. Even Zeus has to bow down to Eros, because Eros can take his arrow and hit Zeus, and now Zeus has to has to bend to the will of Eros, and you don't think about that. And there's another text by Longus in Daphne and Chloe, where it's like there's like, I seen a cow get stuck by Eros and scream like he was stung by a gadfly. And there's just like this this idea that Eros is like behind everything. And I'll give you another example. Like when you're reading Homer, or when you're reading Aeschylus or any of these ancient writers, when Jason gets in trouble in the Argonautica, or when Odysseus gets in trouble, what happens? Eros comes along, shoots a woman, that woman falls in love with the hero, and then she saves him somehow. In the case of Jason, it's is it Medea? I think it is. In the case of Odysseus, it's so there's always someone
Nausicaa, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. They're always being saved by something that Eros does to get him out of trouble.
Yeah.
So you're like, Eros is behind everything. It's kind of weird. It's just weird.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. That's why I did this I focus on this aspect, but I didn't discuss it in this conversation, in the other goddess, what's the part of Eros, and I went through like classical tantra chapter 29, when you sexual rituals, when you become one with God and you walk like a god or goddess on earth, and I went through the lineage of goddesses, started from Nimna and Sumer, and Inanna, Isis, and Mary Magdalene. And I kind of argue what you said before, but actually this is one and the same goddess or priestess. So I'm not sure, Christian theology doesn't allow for it, but for example, Hinduism does, because you can be either incarnated being like avatar, or you through the nous can connect, to this kind of energy. And especially in terms of Inanna, there are these beautiful erotic poems, which are beauty, if you want something really erotic that is not dark, a woman, calling up, Inanna calling up to her lover, extremely erotic, extremely sexy, but not dark. I want to stress, poems which are very sexual, and she was the highest deity. So somehow, and this is also what I argue in Via the Goddess, we pushed the Eros, we pushed our sexuality to the shadows, right? And we push the feminine to the shadows, which both can be them not only, but are some of the means of ascension as well. So ascension through Eros.
Well, to go back to Osiris for a second, when he's being resurrected, his first thing that happens is he gets an erection. As he's in his coffin, he's laying there dead. First thing that happens is he gets an erection.
Yeah.
Isis turns into a bird and then flies over and then basically jerks him off.
That's right.
That's how they describe it, and that's the first thing. That's how he gets That's how he gets resurrected.
Not only that, it's not only that. She really is looking for his penis, because he was spread for depending on mythology, 14 or 42 parts, right?
Yeah, the golden phallus.
A mystical number, and she says, "But okay, where is penis?" And again, I was looking at analogies in Via the Goddess with Tantra, and in Tantra, Goddess Kali does the same exactly what Isis does, to Osiris. Goddess Kali is God Shiva lying dead on the battlefield, or like deadish, and she manages to resurrect him by riding him, because it's Tantra, so although he's dying, his penis is still erect, right? And
so
she basically,
that's a connection, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a tantric. It's a tantric, classical tantra, and she sees him.
Shiva and Magus have a lot in common.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. And she sees his eyes, looks into his eyes, and basically sits on top of him, right? Right, because his penis is still erect, like Osiris's,
Wow.
And she rides him, and she basically not only resurrects him, but the order and harmony returns back to the universe, which before was controlled by the demons that were killing all the gods and people.
They're both blue too. Osiris is depicted sometimes completely blue.
And Shiva is blue.
And Shiva is blue. Mm-hmm. Whoa, I think we found a connection there with Shiva. And also, and Dionysus as well,
Dionysus, and also Mary Magdalene as Isis is also in red, and Kali is also in red, so it is just all of this kind of symbolic colors kind of are.
When Kali and Shiva unite, they become Ardin Shiva.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. I love this stuff.
I love this too. So
but real quick, I just want to say something on that. The Jesus thing. People try to say that there's no sexual stuff going on with him. It's all these other gods, not Jesus though. It's like, what are you talking about? Right before he gets arrested, his feet are being massaged with oils, and that's a sexual scene right there. If you actually read between the lines, you know what's going on there.
Yeah, it is a sexual
and
scene.
All of his disciples are pissed about it. What are they pissed about?
Yeah,
There's something going on there.
And and she's doing it. This woman is touching him.
Woman that's doing it, right?
And she's massaging him, which is actually again classical tantra, because you have to use oils to massage
it off with her hair,
and so on. And also both in the Gospel of Mary, but also in the Gospel of Philip. In Gospel of Philip, especially, she's called his koinonos, which is basically intimate partner, which in New Age interpretation is his wife, because they cannot deal with this, right? But she's basically called his intimate partner. So I think that relationship was more of like a priestess and and they had this kind of relationship.
She was the Sybil.
Yeah, she was visible, exactly, yes. And she was doing her job the way that Inanna and Huedana, which is the priestess of Inanna, was doing, and even Isis need his penis, you know what I mean?
Yeah, Jesus is like a Tammuz figure,
Yeah,
where
he is.
where Tammuz gets killed by these demons, ripped apart, thrown down in the underworld, and then guess who has to save his ass? The woman, the
Mm,
Ishtar, the
mm,
Soteria. She
mm,
goes down and she takes off her garments one by one and
mm,
enters down the different layers of hell, and then
mm.
stands in front of the king of the underworld and says, "Give me my lover back."
Yeah, great
And
story.
they
Right.
have to take it, they have to accept it because it's the savior. And then she
That's right.
brings him back up, and then as she brings him back up, what happens? Springtime happens. It's the same
Yeah.
story.
It's just a
That,
life.
and that was called the Akitu Festival. It was celebrated right now. Right
Mm.
now is when the Akitu Festival will be celebrated. Right now, springtime, Easter.
So, to answer your question, I think that exactly that the reason why they desexualize Jesus, it is because for some reason, and that's why I talked about it in the other goddess, the feminine and sexual was removed not because they didn't like women or something, which they probably didn't, then, but because there is certain power in this ritual. And the power that empowers us, and they don't want us to know it. So it just sounds like a conspiracy theory, but for some reason, this esoteric traditions, you couldn't speak about it, maybe out of fear. You know what I mean? But actually, there's a huge power in Eros, and all of these traditions have it. But that's why they allow her, Mary Magdalene, to be somehow around him and to be somehow sexual, but in a demean kind of version of her, right? But they still didn't manage to get rid of her. And she's like Isis, she's there, she's present at his moment of resurrection, right?
Yeah, look at this. I just found this from what is this from? This is from World Encyclopedia History.
Mm-hmm.
Trusted source here. It
Mm-hmm.
talks about how the descent of Inanna. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking Bronze Age here.
Mm-hmm.
Chronicles of the journey of Inanna, the great goddess of the Queen of Heaven, from the realm of the sky to earth, down into the underworld, where she visits her widowed sister, Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead. That's like Persephone, right? So
Yes.
then it says that she goes from the above, she descends down, and there's her and Demutzi, the one who just
Mm-hmm.
died.
Yeah.
Summary: Inanna is dressed in her finest clothes and wears the crown of heaven. And then that imagery, if anybody who's like immersed in these texts knows, when you hear about a goddess that has the crown of heaven, that's Urania. That's the queen of heaven, basically. It's common, like you hear that with a lot of different goddesses. Anyways, beads around her neck, her breastplate, golden ring carries her scepter, the rod of power. Just before she enters the underworld, she gives Ninsurbar instructions on how to come to her aid should she fail and return when unexpected. Upon her arrival at the gates of the underworld, Inanna knocks loudly and demands entrance. I am Inanna, queen of the heaven. So she goes down, and then this is where it gets crazy. Inanna enters the throne of the room of Ereshkigal, naked and bowed low. Then Anuna, the judges of the underworld, surrounded her. They passed judgment against her. Then Ereshkigal fastened on Inanna the eye of death. She spoke against her the word of wrath. She uttered against her the cry of guilt. She struck her. Inanna was turned into a corpse, a piece of rotting meat, and was hung on the hook on the wall. This is almost
Wow.
like a crucifixion happening right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so no linen was spread over her body. Her breasts were uncovered. Her hair swirled around her like leeks. The poem continues to describe the queen experiencing the pains of labor. The Gala sympathize with the queen's pains, and she, in gratitude, offers them whatever gift they ask for. As ordered by Enki, the Gala respond. By the way, these are eunuch priests, Gala. Just
Mm.
so you guys know, those are eunuch priests. We wish only to the corpse that hangs from the hook on the wall, and Ereshkigal gives it to them. The Gala revive Inanna with the food and the water of life, and she
Yes.
rises from the dead. So look, as they compare it as they should to the Greek of Demeter Persephone. This is the myth of springtime.
Yes.
This is the
It is.
reason why. So the ancients understood this sacred myth. The reason why the crops grow back every year. The reason why the trees go back every year. The reason why you get crops and you get fruits and vegetables is because of the descent into the underworld by the goddess and the
Yeah.
resurrection of the dead
Yes. Yes, and it's totally. But at the same time, and it's absolutely this. But at the same time, there's also an esoteric meaning to it that is telling us, to descend to our basically depths, right, and to raise our consciousness. Because as we said, this language has certain with different levels. So this is one is about fertility, like for the farming society and so on, and another it's actually story of the descent and ascent of your consciousness, which is present in all basically esoteric traditions, whether it's in Hinduism or Egypt, or European traditions. So yeah, and that's why it happens during the spring as a festival, because then it is visible also to a naked eye, right?
Yeah. Well,
Because everything is being reborn.
this is what the Akitu festival is. The
Yes.
Akitu festival, so the Babylonian New Year didn't start in January 1st. It started on April 1st. So right today we'd be in the first week of the new year right now. If we were living in Babylon, ancient Babylon, right now it'd be the first week of the new year and we'd be celebrating the new year. Springtime is the new year, which I think should be the case. Why are we celebrating the new year in the middle of the
Well, I'm
Babylon?
in Australia, so actually I'm celebrating.
That's true. You have a difference, but still.
I am upside down, so
So yeah, if I pull up the Wikipedia page real quick, Akitu, see date April 1st.
Yeah.
So for them it's the new year, but for
Yeah.
us it's Easter.
Yes.
So that's the Akitu festival where they celebrate the Marduk and Ishtar.
Yeah. So it is the same story repeated over and over again,
Exactly.
And even Joseph Campbell, he said when he was speaking in the Jesuit seminaries, and he was reminding the priests, like, look, the story was told many times before, and they said they knew it. They didn't pretend they didn't know it. They just thought that this story was more special and final. Okay, so this is my interpretation, but they actually know it. But I think that this story, my understanding of a story is that we should really focus on the esoteric meaning of it. It doesn't matter really who first or who second, although I think
I
it
agree.
matters from a scholarly point of view, but we should read it in a sense that empowers us.
That's what the Roman imperial cult was doing. The Roman imperial cult was like, okay, we realize that all of these different places that we just conquered Cyprus, they got Venus and Adonis. We just conquered Phrygia, they got Attis and Cybele. The Greeks got Demeter, the Egyptians got Isis and Osiris, and they're seeing all these myths that are aligned. So they start. That's how you get Ovid's Metamorphosis. I mean, Ovid wrote Metamorphosis during the same century that the Romans conquered the whole It's not a coincidence that you get this synchronistic poem written by Ovid in the 1st century BCE, right before, right at the end of the 1st century, right before the 1st century, the Common Era. Ovid writes all these poems in Latin these aren't originally Latin stories. These are originally Greek and Egyptian and Phrygian, but he's writing them all into one place. It's where you get Ovid's Metamorphosis. And that's how you get all these the Roman tradition is about incorporating all these myths and then looking at the esoteric meaning at what does this really mean? Oh, it's the resurrection of springtime. Oh, you know what I mean? And there's different layers to the text.
But there are different layers of the text, and I think that most of the romance, of course, there are some good romance as well, and philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and so on, also they really didn't get the meaning. That's why I was saying that, what happened to the reading of hieroglyphics and, esoteric traditions, that people understood less and less of them, so to speak, right? So eventually it just became just about the spring festival. Rather than what does the spring festival actually symbolize on an esoteric level.
Yeah. There's the connection between the self and the nature.
And self and nature, and also, exactly, absolutely, self and nature. So this is, so in a way, like Easter or, the spring festival, it's almost to remind people, actually this rebirth is possible for you, not in a crude way, you're being born in the same body, but actually, on esoteric level.
Yeah, you too can have a springtime in your life.
Yeah, it is exactly. You have a spring within you, just you have to wake up. So this is it's all about awakening. It's about spiritual awakening. And I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but talking about Romans in Egypt, but it's quite interesting that the Romans couldn't conquer Egypt, and I learned it from Magical Egypt series, until they stored the magical papyri, because they said there is something in this place, so they said, They stole the magical papyri, and then once they, did it, they had no problem of conquering Egypt. So there is some kind of knowledge there, so to speak. But this is really like kind of historical curiositas. But what we have to remember, the Spring Festival is about showing us about our own spring, about our own spiritual evolution and possibility for us. And by saying this, I'm completely distancing myself from all institutionalist religions. This is not what it is that I'm talking about. But in a inborn potential that for some reason, we are not aware of. Maybe some secret societies are aware. There are some esoteric traditions, and these traditions were also hidden from us. That's why it is like, you shouldn't be talking about it. But
Well,
this is
you mentioned how we lost knowledge over time, and those that the Egyptian hieroglyphs and also the Akkadian cuneiform writing. That was those are stuff that people used to know how to cipher, and then they lost it over that knowledge did not get passed down from teacher to student. At some point in time, they lost that ability, and it wasn't until recently, the last century or two, that we figured out how to read it again.
We just, yes, and we only just chose, and we still, for example, like
struggle with it.
Rosetta Stone, for example, the Rosetta Stone, or in your cuneiform, we learn to read the hieroglyphics or cuneiform only on the basic level. Like, what does it actually say? It says about some loss or something, but we don't even understand the second level. Sometimes when we read, about different mythologies, right? Sumerian mythologies or Egyptian, we understand some of the second level, but we still largely do not understand the third level, which is the esoteric level of hieroglyphics or cuneiform, which is actually where the wisdom, hidden wisdom, is carried, right?
Yeah, they have a lot of puns too. So a lot of times one word can mean two different things, and sometimes sometimes they play puns a lot. Like,
yeah, that's right. And I had actually some examples from hieroglyphics, but I unfortunately lost it, when I was preparing for.
There's a lot of that stuff. That's another. We should definitely do an episode on that one time.
Yeah, on hieroglyphics and this stuff, because I just was trying to organize the material, and I thought, how can I simplify the Gospel of Mary? And and I lost some of this Egyptian stuff, because as I said, it's still new for me. That's a new research for me.
Well, the links for your book and all that is in the description. You also, all the websites in there, everything's in the description. Go and check that out. Any last thoughts before we close this out?
Okay, so just on a very mundane level, I'm also on Facebook, so you can get me as Dr. Joanna Kujawa. But also, I think can I make a social commentary just at the very end? Yeah. So I think that this kind of text, like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or with its esoteric tantra, they're very difficult, but they are difficult on purpose because they are initiatory texts. You don't really need a hierophant. You can be your own hierophant. So devoting yourself, for example, to reading, even if you don't understand anything at the beginning. It took me 17 years to get to this point, right? And it's not such a big deal what I actually learned so far, right? So, but they initiate you. Why? Because they awake this kind of possibility in your own consciousness, right? So you don't need to wait for some hierophant to awake you, so to speak. And I think it is really important that we focus our energies on this, for people who want to. So, like serious seekers, so to speak, or serious spiritual detectives, because my commentaries is that, there's so much negativity going at the end here, because we live in such a weird reality. I'm denying that, even I have to say this. But I notice that people prefer to listen to how things are horrible, and they are really complex to say the least, but there is a way out, right? So I would say that maybe we could focus on the way out by reading initiatory texts, working on ourselves rather than obsessing maybe about, the archons and simulation, because there is a way out. So I don't know, did I say something politically incorrect? For the show?
Not at all.
Because this is what the Gnostics and, tantrics, this is what they were saying, there is a way out. You just have to bring yourself like a few days ago somebody says it's like Jacob's ladder. Exactly. You just have to walk the steps of your own consciousness. Otherwise you do feed the lower powers, the more attention you give them, right? So that's why there is this esoteric saying, the world is as you see it, right? And it means if you're on a higher level of consciousness, you see the world in a completely different way. The lower design was destroyed by the power of higher design, and this higher design is in your hands. Doesn't make sense. I'm just,
I love it. I love it. I love it. That's awesome, and I'm glad to have you back here. We'll do this again for sure.
Thank you so much. It's always such a great pleasure. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Everyone.
And you have just attained true Gnosis.
You have just attained true Gnosis. The demiurge has no power over